Hello, everyone. I'm the Bodacious Cowboy with my co-host, Christy Knichel. Are you ready for a special edition of the Storytelling Chronicles? We are. Let's go.
Look out! Pop, pop, it's showtime. 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 Guess who's back again? Oh, they don't know. Gone time. Oh, they don't know. Gone time. I bet they know as soon as we walk in. Showed up. I'm wearing Cuban links. Yeah. Designer mix. Yeah. Inglewood's finest shoes. Whoop, whoop. Don't look too hard, might hurt yourself. Known to give the color red the blues.
Hello, everybody. I am the Bodacious Cowboy. Welcome to another episode of the Storytelling Chronicles, empowering women into logistics. Next to me is the best co-host any podcaster can have, Christy Knichel. Christy, how are you?
Doing great. How you doing?
I am doing well for this rainy Monday here in New Jersey. What's the weather like near you?
I would say it's not rainy, but it's definitely cold. We were just talking about this morning, we're going into April, right? And I feel like spring always comes late. It's almost like May before we start feeling like you get a little bit of teaser of warm weather, but it got like 75 one day and then it was back to 40 the next day. So crazy in the Northwest.
It's freaking 37 degrees over here. I'm tired.
Northeast, I guess I should
We need the warmth.
I know, right?
But today we have an excellent show. We have Dawn Ferrier here that's going to join us. Tell her about her whole story, her journey. So why don't you introduce her?
Yeah, absolutely. We have Dawn Salvucci Favier, brings more than 30 years of transportation management industry leadership to greenscreens.ai. She has spent 20 plus years leading global product strategy and management at major transportation management TMS providers, including Manugistics, GDA Software, Blue Yonder, Shippers, Commonwealth, Red Prairie, and most recently 3G TMS. In each role, Dawn developed and executed a vision and strategy for delivering industry-leading technology solutions to the logistics market. She also brings extensive 3PL and shipper logistics operations experience, having spent time as a director of logistics services for NFI Interactive Logistics and starting her career in the inbound transportation management function at Staples Inc. and the TJX companies. Let's bring her on out.
Hey.
Hey, Dawn. How are you?
I am good. How's it going?
Good.
Good. Yes. I was just jamming out to your theme music back here. It was pretty
I know.
Good.
Isn't that like get you going? You're like, you want to dance and keep
like,
going.
Let's go. Yeah.
Right?
That's a good way to start off a show. That's for sure. Puts you in the mood.
That's right.
So Dawn, I would love for you to start off by, telling everyone kind of how you got into the industry, a little bit about your journey, where you're at today. We know that you just recently sold your company, so just hear a little bit about that because that's exciting to hear, and we'll start with that.
Okay, great. Well, you covered a lot of it in my intro, so thank you for that. But, how I ended up in logistics, like a lot of people that I hear from, it was actually an accident. It was not intentional. When I started at TJ Maxx or the TJX companies in their corporate office, I was hired as the admin to the gentleman who was the VP of inbound transportation for TJ. Literally did not know the difference between a tractor and a trailer. When I started working there, I was like, which one pulls it, which one gets pulled. But, working for probably 18 months or so as his admin, I just got to learn a lot about the business, and he gave me more and more increasing responsibilities, starting with, gosh, this was back in the early 90s. TJ Maxx put their national LTL business out to bid, and he was like, well, first put together the RFP package. Okay, now the responses are coming back on floppy disk, by the way. Would love for you to analyze these responses. Okay, you did the analysis. Now present your findings and make a recommendation to the leadership team. So I was presented with a lot of opportunities along the way and found that I kind of I got it, right? I had a knack for the logistics side of things. I had learned a lot, I had a knack for doing data analysis. So eventually took on roles in the operations team. So moved off of being the admin, and first it was filling in for one of my colleagues on maternity leave and covering one of our regions. I think it was the Southeast region for inbound freight and dealing with our vendors and routing the freight in. And then we had a couple new opportunities come up because we had become so effective at managing the merchandise coming in. Our store operations or our construction team asked us if we would develop a managed transportation program for store fixtures, because that at that time TJ Maxx, I think in one year we had opened like, I don't know, 250 stores a year for like 3 years. It was when TJ Maxx was really growing. So I essentially put that entire program together, was the store fixture delivery program, and then likewise our store supplies. They asked us to put together a program then for delivering the initial supplies to stores, bags, shopping carts, all of those types of things that go along with opening stores. And then TJ Maxx and Marshalls merged. And at that point, we had already implemented, I'll take a step back. Also, part of my role there was we were implementing a TMS. And again, this was back in the early 90s. TMS back then is certainly not what TMS is today by any means, but I really kind of took on the role as like the subject matter expert in the implementation of that TMS. So also found that I had a knack for the technology part of it. So when TJ Maxx and Marshalls merged, they kind of sent me to be in residence at the Marshalls office and learn about their operation, learn about their TMS, which was different, to kind of put together the plan to integrate the two operations, right? Because we were not going to continue to have two separate transportation functions. That made no sense. So really got involved in that and stayed on there for a couple of years. And then the gentleman who I originally worked for as the admin left TJX and went to Staples to start their inbound transportation group. And at the time, they were not managing any of their inbound transportation. It was all vendor managed, prepay and add type freight. But their supply chain group, which by the way, back mid to late 90s, supply chain was still a new term, right? And a lot of people know what it was, but Staples had created a supply chain group, and they had this idea that if they had more control over their inbound transportation, they would therefore then have more control over their inventory replenishment and stockouts and things like that. So they started this inbound transportation group, and the gentleman that I had worked for at TJ Maxx was running that team, and he brought me over to help build up that team again. So few years of doing that. Again, we went through a TMS implementation. We bought a software called Manugistics, which is now part of Blue Yonder. So again, became kind of the subject matter expert lead on implementing that, got really involved in the technology side, and ultimately went to work in the IT department at Staples, supporting all supply chain applications. And it was at that point that I made my move over to technology. Manugistics, who was our software vendor, had a product management position that opened up. And so they asked me if I would be interested. I think it was really because they were just tired of me being the squeaky wheel as a customer. I think they really just thought if they hired me, they wouldn't have to deal with me. But no, I'm just kidding. So that was how I made my move over onto the tech side instead of being on the operations side. And I did do about a 1 year stint at NFI as a director of operations on what was at the time their largest managed service account. It was all refrigerated multi-stop freight. It was during 2004 when we were in the midst of a capacity crisis. So that was a lot of fun. But then it eventually did go back to the technology side because that's really where my passion lies. So Christy, as you said in my intro, I spent 20 years working for various TMS companies, most of whom are part of Blue Yonder now. Was one of the co-founders of 3G TMS, who is not part of Blue Yonder now. And then in 2020, I had the opportunity, I was introduced to Green Screens. So Green Screens had just started actually in April of 2020. So we're coming up on our 5th anniversary here as a company. It was in the summer of 2020 I was introduced to them. I had really decided to go my own way and open a consulting practice. Really, my goal was to work with either logistics companies that needed help with a technology roadmap, or logistics or freight technology companies that needed go-to-market strategy help, because that's what I had spent 20 years doing. So I was really kind of marketing myself as a consultant, and was introduced to Greenscreens. The chairman of their board is Ben Gordon, who you and many of your listeners may know. He asked me to take a look at the company. I thought I was pitching myself as a consultant to him. So I put together my fancy proposal. Here's an 8-week engagement, and here's my deliverables and what the outcomes will be. And he said, "Well, that's great, but we're really looking for a CEO for the company. Do you want the job?" And I said, "No, I really don't. I'm a product person. I'm not a CEO." And, look, at the time, I had, and some of your listeners have probably heard me tell this story before, but at the time I had never raised money, right? Greenscreens was a startup, had never raised money before. I had been a part of the sales process, but I'd never led a sales team. And my comment to Ben was, look, it might make sense now for me to be the CEO. At the time, we didn't have a product that was in market. It was, post hypothesis, but pre MVP product. So sure, maybe it made sense then, but at some point, you're going to want a real CEO, is kind of what I said to him. And so I took on the position as interim CEO in 2020, with the intent that I would help develop the go-to-market strategy, get the product in market, and in the meantime, help them find their CEO. Right. So after about 18 months, we did raise money. I learned a lot through that process. And it was about that time that the board was like, "Okay, are you ready to drop the interim and just take this on
Yeah.
permanently?" So that was in 2022. So I just talked a lot, but that's how I got into logistics, and kind of has led me here to Greenscreen. So now, as CEO and Chief Product Officer, and in addition to that, I'm also the co-chair and director of content for the Broker Carrier Summit, which I know both of you are very involved in. And I have the pleasure of serving on the steering committee of the Women in Logistics, Broker Carrier Summit Women in Logistics group with Christy. So um, very exciting. So that's where I'm at.
That's awesome journey. I didn't know, I think, any of that background, like where you came from, and even the green screens. Like I know Ben obviously involved, because I know Ben Gordon and whatnot. The fact though that you took on that role, not being comfortable, just
Right.
trying to find your way, like that's so inspiring. How do you feel now though about where you're at and what you've accomplished at Green Screens?
Oh, I mean, I feel great about it. Like, honestly, 5 years ago, I just remember talking to some of my trusted advisors, my personal advisors, and being like, do I really want to do this? Like, A, I'm getting old. Do I really want to work that hard anymore and be the CEO of a startup? I've been doing this since I was 24 years old. And but no, I feel great about it. I'm incredibly proud of what we have accomplished as a company. It was a team effort. I'm not for 1 minute gonna pretend it was me. I'm really proud of the team that we've assembled here, right? As they say, it takes a village, and it's really been a full team effort. And I'm sure many of you have seen the news. We actually announced about a month ago that we are planning an exit. We announced that we have signed an agreement to be acquired by Triumph Financial. So we are in kind of a regulatory approval process right now. So the deal has not yet closed. We are expecting it will close in the second quarter, though. So,
Nice.
so this will be my second exit in 7 years. So it's pretty exciting. Actually, my third exit in 15 years. So
Wow.
Wow.
So let me ask you this. With any M&A, because of the deep experience that you have in that area, are you transitioning over to Triumph as part of the transition team? And is it like an 18-month or 24-month stint and then you're out? Or, I mean, because why would they want to lose that experience? I mean, it's
yeah, they do not. As a matter of fact, I am transitioning over. It is at least 2 years, right? There is no defined endpoint, right? But it's
right.
at least a 2-year commitment. And then we see where we both are, right? At the end of 2 years, where the business is at, where am I at? I'm approaching 60, so I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. Well, I mean, I would, but I'd like to rest at some point. So yeah, we'll take a look, and it's not just me. Our entire leadership team is
Sure.
coming over.
That's good.
Our entire team is. So the vision here is, and I'm not talking out of school here. Aaron Graft, who is the CEO of Triumph, announced back, I believe it was the end of the third quarter or the beginning of the fourth quarter, that they were going to start a new business segment. So for those of you that don't know, Triumph Financial is the parent company of Triumph Pay. So they've got their factoring business, their payments business. They're also a consumer bank. So they've got, I'm going to totally screw up the number of branches, but I want to say more than 50 branches. We'll say that, of really consumer bank, or close to 50 branches, let's say, throughout the United States, more kind of like a credit union type bank. But they did announce that they were uh, introducing a fourth kind of business unit called Triumph Intelligence, which is really kind of focused around leveraging the data that they have, right? They've got this dense network, probably the densest network of factoring and payments data in the country. It's validated data, right? Because it's payment data. So we know that it's true and accurate, and it's very timely. So starting to leverage not only their data, but more data than that, to really deliver more business intelligence to the broker and carrier community, around price, performance, and capacity. Really is the focus there. And they acquired Isometric Technologies, ISO, in December, which they cover the performance part. And now with green screens coming over, we do really the pricing. So we do both cost and price optimization for freight brokers today.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that with us. It's just very interesting, and you should be very proud. And 60, you don't look anywhere near 60.
No.
I'm getting there.
You
I'm
might
getting
feel
there.
like it. I mean, I get that from being through the industry like we have, been in, but
I'm well pickled. That's what I like to say.
well, that's a good way to say it. So,
High end vinegars he's using.
since you've been in the industry for so long, and starting back when you mentioned tech was totally different, how was that now as a woman versus what it is today?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, if I go back to my days when I first started in operations, moving over from being an admin into operations, interestingly enough, at TJ Maxx, most of the freight administrators on our team were women, but virtually everybody that we dealt with outside of our company
Right.
were men, right? And there was a lot of this sweetie, baby, honey, can I talk to your manager? You don't know what you're talking about, sweetie, darling, that type of thing, which, doesn't fly today, right? It's a little bit different. But I think TJ's just was a very progressive company from the beginning. Like I said, it was majority of our freight administrators on that team were women, and even when I went over to Staples, the majority of that logistics team were women as well. So I think that was a rarity because we dealt with a lot
Yes.
more men. Over the years, and even going back to the early 2000s, the number of women, particularly women in leadership positions in the industry, was very minimal. Even if I go back to, I don't know, 5 years ago, I was attending one of the smaller industry conferences, and I kind of look. It was all senior leadership in the supply chain industry, and I looked around the room, and I could count on both hands. There was probably 350 people there. I could count on both hands the number of women that were in the room, and I knew that half of them were events support staff, right? Um, and just being at other things like within our investors portfolio, they do a portfolio day, and there was one. The CEOs of all the portfolio companies come together and sitting in the conference room. This was just a couple of years ago. The hotel event coordinator, I was the only woman in the room. She was like, "We're going to take breakfast away now. Is that okay?" And I'm like, I don't know. I'm an attendee. Like, are you assuming that I'm like the meeting coordinator because I'm the only woman in the room? And, so, but the industry is really different. I mean, look now, when you go to Manifest or even Broker Carrier
Yep.
Summit, I mentioned that Christy and I are part of the Women in Logistics group. We announced that at the Fort Worth Summit back in October. And after we announced that, we kind of opened it up for enrollment. And I think we had about 20 Christie people sign up from that. And we kind of got a slow start. We launched that in January with like 20 people. Coming out of that January meeting, we created 3 subcommittees. So we had the member recruitment, education, and events subcommittee, kind of run by other members. We've now had 75 new members sign up in the past like 6 weeks, right? So
Awesome.
we're at almost 100 members in that group. So just, women in general in this industry, women of all ages, right? From, people just coming out of college, all the way up to the old ladies like myself, and just a lot more women leaders, not just in, on the operation side, like Christy and Shelly and a lot of people like them, but also in technology. If you look across the freight technology industry, there's a lot of female CEOs. You've got Kendra at Truck Stop, and you've got Carrie from Trucker Tools now, DAT, and many others, right? So I just see the role that women are playing in logistics has changed so dramatically from the early 90s when I first started, where we were more of an administrative function, right?
Yeah, that's interesting because Don, when you and I spoke about getting more women involved in it, the reason why I brought that up to you was everybody was saying, "Oh, the BCS is a bro show, a,
Right.
a bro show," and I was like, "No, it's not." And these were coming from people that didn't even attend. They're
Right.
like, "Why would I want to go there? I can go to any other event." I said, "You don't understand. This isn't that type of every other event.
Right.
Nobody's hard selling. There's no booths. There's this, there's that. Well, what about the women? Yeah, there's women there, And I was like, no, something has to be done about this because it was just wrong the way it was getting publicized, And
Yeah.
I'm glad that you guys really took this off and like it's booming. You have 100 women now on that. Is that
Just under 100, yeah,
that's
signed
awesome.
on. And as I said, we have the 3 committees that each committee has a chair, and different members are helping out with that. So, yeah, it's really exciting to
That
see,
that is
again, another grassroots movement within a grassroots movement,
right.
right? It's
Yeah.
been really, really exciting.
And too that Christy and I, the empowering women into logistics um, segment of the Storytelling Chronicles, we're going to now award the woman at the BCS.
Yes.
I cannot be there this year. I get too much stuff going, but Christy's going to do that and be the first one to do that. And I think it's just the right platform to do this kind of stuff, because there's so much collaboration, there's so much knowledge to be gained and shared, by both sides. And the women definitely engage with the men, vice versa. Nobody's overpowering anybody there. They have their own say. And it's just great to see that collaboration finally coming together. And we're not done yet. I mean, the
No.
BCS is not done yet. I mean, it's still in a baby stage. This is what the fifth. Yeah, this is the fifth event that
Yep.
that you had.
Yep.
And it's just growing leaps and bounds. I'm so happy for you guys. Really, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I want to say to you, Don, is I think you've done a tremendous job, though, putting that together and getting us together. And then just the women that stepped up initially to like build out these committees. And I know with getting the help from some of the other women, I haven't been as involved as, say, Melanie, for example. But like, it's just interesting to me, though, how fast it did actually come together. I know you were saying it took some time, but I feel like with everything you have going on and whatnot, like it actually came together pretty fast. And being at that last event, that was probably the most women I have seen at an event that I have been
Right.
at, to be quite honest. I know the TIA is getting up there in the women numbers too, but like for that to be that new and that many women at an event, I was just blown away. So I love that, you're heading this and part of putting this together, and and what made you like want to be a part of the BCS in the first place and like put this mission out there.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think I know, Jeff, at least you, maybe Christy, you too. Well, Jeff, you were at the very first one, right?
No, I wasn't at Indy.
Okay, you weren't
I,
at
I
Indy.
was at
Okay.
the I was at the last 3. Yep.
Okay, so we got involved around the same time, but really the way it came about is it was after the Indie Summit, which was the first one, and it was Dan's dream, and it was let's just put brokers and carriers together in the room just to see what happens, right?
Yeah.
And Indie went well, and Dan and I were speaking at the TIA conference that April. It was, I think, maybe just a couple weeks after the first Indie conference, and he was like, "So I did this thing, and I have this crazy idea," and he kind of pitched it to me, and I was like, yes, I want green screens to be involved in this, like as a sponsor, as a speaker, whatever you need, we want to be involved in that. So we first got involved for the Tampa Summit, which
Hmm.
was October of, the years are blending together, 23.
23.
October
Right.
23 is when we first got involved just as a company, and I actually was the keynote speaker for that one. It was much smaller
Yep.
than it is today, and Green Screen sponsored. I think we were one of the meeting room sponsors or something like that. But it was shortly thereafter that Dan decided to officially form a board for the Broker Carrier Summit. Right, Tampa was a huge success.
Yep.
We saw the movement. We knew that this was going to be something big. So Dan formed the board and asked me if I would be interested in joining the board, for a few reasons. Number one, he wanted to have a well-rounded board, right? So the board consists of, I'm director of content, but I'm also kind of the technology liaison because, and I like to say as a tech
Makes sense.
provider, it's our job to attend these events and interact with our customers because, and I think you've both heard me say this, technology can either be an enabler or a deterrent
Sure.
to collaboration and progress. And I want to make sure that not just my company, but all of the tech companies are not a deterrent to helping brokers and carriers work more closely together. So that was for me, but the board itself is really really well rounded with representation from the tech community, the carrier community, both large and small, the broker community. We have Kevin Hill representing media, right? So we have a lot of good cross sectional representation on the team. But I think secondly was most of the folks on the board of BCS has never been on a board before or dealt with a board before or done things like fundraising before, just like me 5 years ago, right? So and I'm the mom. The guys on the board, it's all men, but the guys on the board, they call me mom. I keep them honest and out of trouble. So but no, I was just really passionate about BCS and the idea behind it, because I really do think that a lot of the problems and the resentment and the tension or friction that exists between brokers and carriers today are just because brokers and carriers aren't given the opportunity to just sit down and talk it out. Like, a lot of the contention we see is fueled by social media
Yep.
or by propaganda or anecdotes and things like that. So BCS is really all about giving brokers and carriers a neutral forum where these people can sit down together, um, and talk it out and create some meaningful relationships and create new business for themselves.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that perspective because I think you're absolutely right in having a well-rounded board that comes in, for all these different areas that they cover, and I love the whole mom part of that as well. I would tend to agree with you there.
Yeah.
But
She's a mom. I got to be a dad.
yeah, right. It's different though. I still think when you're a mom. I mean, I know there's dads out there that are dads and mom too, in the same token. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think, more challenging because you have that mommy guilt at times, or at least I know I did when I'm traveling all the time, and I know you travel quite a bit too. And it's not easy trying to build a career, and trying to still be that mom you want to be too,
Yeah.
on top of that. So
Yeah, and I think I had this conversation with on another founder's podcast once, and it was a male founder that had asked me the question, and he talked about the mom guilt, but I'm like, I don't know that it's just mom guilt. I think it's parental guilt, right? I think
yeah,
any of us who are parents with children, you kind of carry that guilt. Like, am I going to miss the major events and things like that? And I think, again, like I said about the company, I had a great teammate, right? A great partner. My husband had the flexibility and which enabled me to do what I did, right? Enabled me to travel. He was willing to step it up. He had the flexibility with his, he stayed at home with the kids for a long time. And once they were both in school full time, he started working again, but had the flexibility that he could be there if they were sick or needed to be picked up or whatever the case may be. And I think, it's important that you have that support network. And I know not everybody has that
Yeah.
supportive partner. And, then it truly does, again, I'm going to say it, take a village, whether it's family or friends or whatever. So I know that I've been very fortunate there in having a really strong partner along the way that allowed me to do that. Not to say that there was no guilt. Um, Pretty much was able to work it out. So I never missed any of the major events, was able to kind of work the travel, the concerts, the awards, banquets, all of those things. I missed some track meets. A few things like that that might happen during the week right after school. But, for the most part, you figure it out, right?
Yep.
Yep. No,
Yep.
absolutely. Like you said, I have a similar story too. And again, without having your partner be able to be that stay-at-home parent, or whether they are or not, but just to have that support system around you so you can build your career for your family, I think it's just so crucial. So
Yeah.
But we had came such a long way. I mean, let's face it, our parents, mom always stayed home. Dad always went and provided for us. They stayed with their company and got the golden watch and off to retirement. And then as it went through the 70s and you got into the 80s, women got more involved into businesses, and things started reversing themselves. What we're seeing today. More breadwinners are the females, and the dads are staying at home, like Dawn said, until their kids grow up. And then next thing you know, they're out in the workforce too. Now you got dual incomes.
Right.
So I mean, the transformation there is good, but we're still not where we need to be when you look back at the 1964 Civil Rights Act and you're looking at Title VII. I mean, when you're making 80s, look, you're both CEOs or presidents of a business, but the unfortunate thing is that the women are still making 86 cents on a dollar. I mean, that's still factual. And then you look at women who are on boards and CEO positions, with black women, taking them as an example, only 8% of them are in those type of roles. And then you look at the rest of the women out there, a very small majority. Are they moving up? Yeah, I mean, if you're like a Shelley Simpson or somebody like that who has grown through, being a customer relationship person working on the floor to a president of the company. I mean, the evolution is turning, but we still need to do a lot of more work, and men need to get more involved in this. One of the reasons, I mean, I'm a father of one child daughter, and I live in a women household. So it's like, they need our support, and that's why I joined the Women in Trucking, and I try to support the groups, and I support the women in logistics, at the BCS as well as here. And that's what it's all about. Guys have to start jumping on board this train and helping them move, helping them to elevate, to get up to those higher positions.
Yeah.
It
And
opened up.
I've been really fortunate that I've had a lot of really strong male mentors throughout my career, right? The gentleman that I started working with, as his admin, who then brought me along with him to Staples and just everything that he taught me along the way. And it wasn't just him. I had an entire team of male managers at TJ Maxx and at Staples that really kind of mentored me along the way. And I agree with you, Jeff. I think, we're seeing that more and more. One of my favorite moments of the BCS Fort Worth was there was a gentleman who I think he owned a trucking company. He brought his 14 or 15-year-old
She was
daughter
great.
to the BCS with him.
Andy.
Andy, and
Yes.
we gave her a shout out in the audience, but well, first of all, she was like, I'm coming back. Like, she told her dad, she was like, Dad,
Smart
I'm
kid.
coming back to the next one. She's super smart. She
Super.
was so engaging, and just well spoken, like went out of her way to talk to Christy and Melanie and me and others, just reaching out. So I am so excited for this next generation. I mean, the current generation as well, but the
right.
next generation of women in this industry. And, a lot of the younger men are embracing women in leadership, and it's been great.
Well, and one of the things I wanted to share, because I have a question I'm going to ask you next, but I actually spoke at CMU on Friday, and it was about, it was a kickoff to their event with women and mentoring and whatnot. Almost all the people in the room were men, very little women that attended. And one of the first questions I was asked was, some of the barriers for women entering into our space. And before I even answered that, I congratulated the men for being there, because they're such a big part of why, or, we need them there to help uplift women in the industry. But one of my first answer to the barriers was going to be about being a male dominated industry as one of the barriers. And women see that sometimes as intimidating and a challenge. So I would ask you, like, what do you think some of the barriers are keeping from women entering leadership roles, like within technology? Because obviously you had a path, but what do you see, I guess, in technology that might be different than maybe on our side, that might be some different barriers for them?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm gonna think carefully about this. I think obviously I have more firsthand experience in the technology side than I do in the operations side, but I think the barriers are less in technology than they are on the ops side. I think, we I think it's been longer that we have seen women in leadership roles on the technology side. If not CEO, then, chief marketing officer, chief people officer, right? Things like that, product leadership type roles. I think from a technology perspective, the barrier is less. And, again, on the technology side, look at STEM programs, right? Science, technology, math, in the engineering and math, still male dominated, right? So, um, but it's changing. I think you see a lot more schools and a lot more programs that are encouraging young women into STEM programs, and a lot of funding going into that as well. Um, on the operations side, I mean, look, logistics isn't for the faint of heart. It's a lot of long hours. It's a lot of long days. I think maybe one of the biggest barriers, and this is just my gut instinct, is the mom problem, right? Is, I am the primary caretaker of my children and I have a career. I can't have a job that is not 9 to 5, that type of mentality, because either I don't have a partner or my partner is traveling full time and is the primary breadwinner. So I have to have that flexibility, and that's my gut. I'd be curious on what your take is, Christy, because you're more in tune on the operation side.
Yeah, so honestly, other than the male dominated space, that was my other answer. It really was, I don't want to call it workplace balance, but it is truly, being that mom, having the flexibility. Because again, like, we have a lot of women that work here too, and they work in those roles. And like you said, they can be longer hours, it's more challenging. And we try to work with them, as much as we can. And not every company is going to be willing to do that. And I think finding those flexible positions where they can get those things done that they need to do, whether it's doctor appointments, just time off when your kid's sick, or going to a game because it starts at 4 o'clock and you work till 5. So I do think flexibility plays a key role in finding more women coming up in the ranks on the operations side in particular.
Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
What I've seen over the decades is that corporations are introducing daycare, childcare, and they have offices. They used to be offices that the women could bring their kids in there, and then they would have like smoke breaks or whatever, where they would have kid breaks, and they'd be able to go down there like every hour and a half or whatever, check on their kids, see how they're doing and everything, which I think is great, to have that kind of thing. I mean, I do see that in the industry, popping up a lot more. But I also think that one of the barriers are, and I still think it's a problem, not that you two have it, because you're not introverts, you're extroverts, and you're well spoken, and you tell it the way it is. But I think there's a lot of women out there that are afraid to speak their mind because of repercussions from doing so, and I think that has to be talked about a lot, to express yourself, tell them how you feel, what's not working, what is working. I always had the open door policy when I was managing some women and men as well in operations, that anytime that a woman walked in my door, I don't care how busy I was, they were more important than my project, and I had to give that attention. I think there's a lot of problems still out there where the men aren't giving or listening with intent. I should say the primary word is intent. They may listen, but they're not listening to what is being said and understanding it. And they need to do that a little bit more. And I think we need to discuss that more and more, in an open forum to help these women to elevate, because I do believe that they're still scared or afraid not to speak up.
Well, a couple things on that. I mean, going back to your daycare question or comment, both TJ Maxx and Staples back in the early 90s had on-site daycare. So that is another thing that I can say allowed me to do what I did, because I did. I brought
Mhm.
my kids to daycare when my husband was also working. Well, with the first one anyway, once we had two kids, we were like, holy crap, we can't afford to have two kids in daycare right now, right? Um, so I think there's something to be said for that. And Christy, I think you and I were on a panel on Word on the Street once. It was when the Women Takeover Day, and
Yeah,
the whole comment, Jeff, you made about women being afraid. I don't know if it's necessarily afraid. It's just that when a woman, sometimes, not always, but when a woman is strong about something and really forceful about something, she gets labeled a bitch. Can I say that?
yeah,
You can
Um,
say whatever you want.
will often be labeled as a bitch, right? And even though that's not
Right.
the intent, whereas if a man had said the same thing, it would be like, yeah,
Matter.
yeah, man. But then
Yeah.
it's like, did you hear her? What a bitch, right? Like, so I think if there's a fear, it's often the fear of being labeled as a bitch, right? Which, yeah, and it is unfortunate, right?
It is.
Because, and I think we do have more work to be done there for sure. Um, the other thing I wanted to say, though, I think with as far as empowering women or enabling women to be more involved and be more elevated, of all the bad things that COVID brought us, I think the one good thing is work from home or hybrid work
Yes.
models, because that does allow, even in a two income, two working family household, if you do have the flexibility to work from home, you kind of get that inherent flexibility of doctor's appointments, or I got to run out and pick the kids out. I've been fortunate that I've worked from home since 2004, right? So, before it was the cool thing to do, and managing remote teams. So I think, the acceptance of work from home, or more broad acceptance of work from home, is also helping there too.
Hmm.
yeah.
And they're more productive too. I mean, there
Yeah,
is case study out there, because when you're working from home, you don't have to travel an hour a day to get to the office. So automatically, you're gaining 10 more hours of productivity, 40 hours an extra week a month on that, right? You don't have to go out to lunch and waste time, and you can just roll out of bed and go to the office and
right.
go to work. So I don't know why that's not being done. I mean, you know, there's been a lot of work saying, well, now since that's over with for the last few years, now it's time to go back to work. Do you really have to?
Yeah, I would say we actually made a decision to bring our people back 4 days a week. We still give them Fridays, and then of course we're
Nice.
still flexible. But I did move into a building that has a daycare, that has a gym, that has a
Awesome.
cafeteria, specifically to try to make it better for everyone, easier if possible. And they're supposed to provide it at a cheaper cost to the outside. Now, the area that we're in might be a little bit elevated compared to some people that have their children in daycare elsewhere at this time. But again, I think the whole idea around making it easier for the women and or men
Yep.
to be able to come to work. And again, I know that was probably the biggest issue my employees had, was us coming back 4 days a week, regardless of the situation. But the business that we're in, a lot of those roles, I feel like you have to be together. We're hiring people that are new out of college. How are they going to learn if they're only here 3 days a week working with you? That's why we went with 4 and still giving them that Friday work from home. So I do think that there's a good balance there
Hmm.
that should be there, and as long as they're doing what they should be doing at the end of the day, I think it's important, because I do have some people that are fully remote that are out of state. And obviously, no matter what, that always comes up, right? You have other people that are remote, but it makes it a little bit challenging. But again, I think it just depends on the role too
Sure.
that you're in. So, um, but yeah, that's what I had to add for that. And I wanted to ask you too, just to change the subject a little bit, but like, we've heard so much about green screens out there. I know my company has looked at it. We haven't gone that way because right now we're kind of growing out some other areas. But what do you think was the biggest challenge you had in getting that product to getting it out there to get out and sell and in front of brokers.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the early days, if you go back 5 years ago, it was really kind of two primary problems. The first one, and probably for the first 12 to 18 months, was really just re-educating the industry because what we're doing is novel, right? It's new and it's different, and people have been doing the same thing for decades as far as what is a market rate, right? They're either using their own data, they're going to one of two or three other sources and looking at what the historical rates have been, but there was really nothing in the industry that was A, predicting forward, and B, using AI and machine learning to do that, right? So part of it was just getting, re-educating on why it's different and why it's better. The second was the data, right? There's two pieces to the data. Number one was getting people to be willing to part with their data and share their data. And I
Good.
think because, it's getting much, much better even in the past 5 years, but, data is still very siloed in our industry and people hold on to their data. So it was really just earning that trust of companies like, we're a neutral party. You need to submit your data to get anything out of the system. And second to that, I think what makes our product the most powerful is the volume and the density of data that we have. So
Mm,
we were fairly limited in how broad we could go to market until we had that density of data, right? So that was really the first 12 to 18 months was the education and trying to break down some of those silos of people really wanting to hold their data tight. And it was just a matter on, getting people to let go of their data was being able to adequately convince them, look, even if you're a 500 million or even a billion or a $3 billion freight brokerage, you have a lot of data. But at the end of the day, you still only have your own data, which isn't going to show you where your blind spots are,
right.
right? It's not going to give you any intelligence around where you're not already doing business and what you don't already know, right? So if you have a neutral party that can aggregate and anonymize the data, ensure that it's very clean data, that it's, real time or near real time at worst, daily at worst, and use that data to expose your blind spots, right? And help you better understand where you're not already doing business, right? Because how much more do you really need to know about where you're already doing business? It's where you need to go to win that new business to grow, right?
Right. Right.
Right. And I think the difference, would you say, between what you are putting out there versus, say, truck stop and DAT, is it because the AI piece of predictive versus the products they have, which we know sometimes is old data, even though we submit our data?
Yes, but it goes a step further than that because, the companies that you mentioned and others do a really good job of creating what I'll call an index rate, right? What was the rate? It's a market index. But what we are delivering to our customers is every green screens customer um, gets their own personally trained machine learning model. And what does that mean? Well, what that means is when we onboard a customer, we take that customer's historical data and the machine learning engine is trained to understand the individual buying power of that organization, right? And I like to say size doesn't always matter here, right? A
Mm,
C.H. Robinson may not necessarily buy better than Jeff Dickinson, right? Just because they're bigger, because Jeff has areas of specialization, or he might have some great carrier relationships in some certain niches, as we like to say, riches and niches, right?
right.
Um, so every customer gets that individually trained model that is showing them, okay, well, and we do also have a market rate, which is the aggregated data of all of the customers, which we're
Sure.
over 220 now. But
Nice.
every customer sees this is what the Green Screens network rate is. So the 220 plus brokers predicted forward. But here's your rate because just because that market rate says it's $1,000 doesn't mean that's what you're going to pay, right? You might pay $1,200 because you've never run that lane before and you don't have any carrier relationships and you're going to have to go out on the load board and pay a premium for it. Or it might be a screaming backhaul for one of your existing carrier relationships and you may pay $800 for it, right?
Right.
So it is really kind of showing them that from a broker to truck cost perspective. And then what we're also doing is then suggesting a sell price, right? So we're working on both sides of the transaction. So it's not just here's what you're going to pay a carrier, here's what you should charge a customer, right? And that suggested sell price, number one, is really intended to remove the friction between the carrier reps and the customer reps, right? Because when we first started on our journey here, there was a lot of this going on,
Yeah.
right? When you talk to either side, well, it's like, well, if our salespeople could sell, then, maybe we could cover their loads. And,
Yeah.
then it was the salespeople saying, well, if my carrier reps were better. So there's this inherent friction. So if both sides are seeing a number that is based off of a single reality, right? And in order to produce that suggested sell price, we are allowing our customers to kind of put their own secret sauce in so they can set up their own pricing rules. Or if they don't have pricing rules, we can again use their historical data and their win rates and their margin targets or historical margin to kind of suggest,
To build on.
which infers customer willingness to pay too, right? It kind of infers all that. So we can suggest to the customer, this is what you're going to pay for it. And this is what we suggest you sell it at. And here's the margin and all of that.
So when I'm going to assume that all these customers, in order to get their data, that you had them sign an NDA, number one, right? And then were they kind of reluctant, saying, okay, so I signed this NDA, and you're going to be matching it up with all different regions, same lanes, back hauls, front hauls, all of this. Are they going to be able to see my information that's in there? I mean, because everybody's protected of that, right?
Sure.
And the thing is that when you're looking at it collectively, you're not taking just their data. I had a saying that I always use: I believe in God, everybody else brings data, because you want to take the emotional part out of the decision making, and you want to get many different perspectives from many different shippers instead of just one. And then you're going to take the abnormalities out of it. You're going to build that, and then basically come up with that buy sell feature on that. So where was the stumbling block? Was it on the NDA on that side, or where was it?
No, it was just, again, it was just the willingness, the fear that their data, that their competitors were going to be able to see their data. And look, let's be honest, there's been companies like us that have tried to do this, but also operated freight brokerages, right? And that's where we say, well, they're not going to, who's going to, or even some of the larger brokers that have the ability to build something like this in-house, they're always only going to have their own data because their competitors aren't going to give them the data. So it was building the trust and really just showing them that, look, nobody is ever going to see who your customers are, who your carriers are. They're never going to know what lanes you are running because we are aggregating and anonymizing all of that data into a single model, single output, right? So all anybody else is going to see about other people's data is just an aggregated number, right? How many, and our competitors do something similar, right? How many reports are there on the lane? What is the min and max, over 30 days? But then there's also that predicted target rate of that aggregated data. So it was just really establishing the trust with people that we were never going to show their competitors their sensitive information.
So was it built on vertical weight, and just one more I'm missing out on: vertical weight niche?
Vertical weight niche.
Yeah.
Not
So you're comparing like furniture moves to stereo equipment to a
Gotcha.
specific
Gotcha.
vertical.
Oh yeah. Okay. So you're talking about the industry verticals. So commodity is an input that we can take, but generally when we're doing these predictions, we're doing them 5-digit zip code to 5-digit zip code, right? So with the exception of some dense manufacturing areas, getting down to the 5-digit zip code level, you're pretty keyed in on what's being shipped out of that 5-digit zip code, right? Again, there are some geographically or manufacturing dense, let's see, zip codes, but for the most part, if you're going to the 5-digit, not a KMA, not even a 3-digit zip code, but a 5-digit zip code, it is almost getting you down to the location level. Now, commodity is one of the inputs we can take. It's an optional, so they don't have to give us a commodity. And the biggest challenge with commodity is the rationalization of commodities across all the different TMS systems and all of that, where we're getting our data from, right? And we know for a fact, just as an example, that sometimes liquor shipments are not recorded as liquor for
Right.
various reasons, right? So, and the accuracy of it. So we will take commodity into consideration, and it's particularly important for things like seasonality, right? Our analysts last summer put out a report that kind of showed um, rate volatility moving from south to north with the harvest season. It was actually a really cool graphic, time phase graphic that they showed over the course of the growing or the harvest season from south to north. So, we do consider that. So yes, commodity is part of that. So the required inputs, Jeff, are origin, destination, equipment type, pickup
Sure.
date, and time. Those are the only things we require, right? And then there's a bunch of optional. So customer, commodity, weight, um, delivery date and time, right? So those are some other things. And then we're deriving a lot of things from those inputs. Time of day, day of week is important, right? Lead
Definitely.
time is important, right? But those are all things that are kind of being derived from the inputs that we do require.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I know that we share our data with several different companies, and I will say I don't think it's ever been an issue for us or concerned. I agree with you. Like, you need that data so you can better yourself in your business, because if you don't, all you have is your own data, and who knows really what you can get out of that other than what you're seeing. You're not comparing it to anything.
Right.
So
Right.
Well, and then the final thing I would say, or two other things that really kind of is different about green screens than some of the others. Number one is our approach to ensuring the data we're feeding in the algorithm is very clean, right? So we have a whole data cleansing process that when we onboard a customer, we go through, and then we're consistently applying these data cleansing filters to make sure that we're not feeding any of the outliers into the algorithm, right? Which could severely skew the outcome there. And the other is just the transparency. We are the only pricing vendor that actually in real time shows our customers exactly how we're doing from an accuracy perspective, as far as what we said the price was going to be to what you actually booked that freight at.
Right.
Our go live criteria, minimum go live criteria with our customers, is that the margin of error on our predictions needs to be 10% or less. We right now are averaging across all of our 220 customers about 6.4% margin of error on our predictions.
Wow.
So,
Great. That's
yeah,
awesome.
that's amazing. And I don't know if you can answer this or not, but does your company eliminate or could eliminate using a truck stop or a DAT product?
we have some customers that have eliminated using other rating systems. Yes.
Yeah, because I think, again, when you go back to talking about people that have done it this way for this long, sometimes I feel like it's like we use both those systems, right? And then it's like, do you need to have, both of them if your system does something similar? But it sounds like it's actually doing things that are better, and that real time, like I really like that. So that's definitely something I want to explore further.
Yeah. We're pre-connected into 14 TMSs right now. So what that means is where we have those TMS connections, and by the way, even our customers that have proprietary systems, really super easy to integrate into our system. Every time a load gets booked, that load flows to us in real time, which then means it has the opportunity to influence the next pricing prediction on that lane. My favorite story to tell about that, and I know we're running close on time here, but I'll try to tell it quickly, was, this was fairly early on. We had one of our brokers, new customer, they knew a particular lane really well. We put out a prediction that was $500 more than what they believed the price on the lane should be. So, of course, they called us and complained and asked us to look into it. And about an hour later, they called us back. They said, "Never mind. That manufacturing facility doubled production yesterday and didn't tell us. So that price prediction that you put out is actually accurate because we've consumed all the capacity in that market. So now we're deadheading capacity in from other markets to service that facility."
Right.
And that's just how quickly the algorithm through the data was able to pick up on that. Right.
I love that, and I love that example, because then you're just, yeah, I would have called too, $500, or
Yeah.
but
What are
perfect.
you out of your mind?
Yeah, exactly. This thing's broken. You need to fix it. Turn it off. Yeah.
Right? No, that's a great story. Since we are running out of time and this went so fast, and thank you again for coming
No.
on today. We always love to end with you leaving some advice for people coming into the industry, whether it's technology space or not. What would you have to share?
Oh, wow. So I will quote, I think it was Mr. Rogers' mom, find the helpers, look for the helpers, something like that. I think, we talked a little bit briefly about mentorship, and I think mentorship, whether it's intentional or intentional, is really important, but it's 100% on you, the receiver, to make sure that you take advantage of it and that you're open to feedback and sometimes criticism. Be willing to take the risks. Be willing to do the things that might be uncomfortable or outside the norm, like taking a CEO position when you didn't think you were ready to do it, and ultimately sometimes failing. Right? To me, it's not a
Definitely.
failure if you take something away from it. So I would, just look for the helpers. You know, try to understand or know when someone is there and trying to help you, and make sure you take something away from those opportunities.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and your journey and all the advice.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you guys for having me on. I'll see you both in Indy, right? Oh no,
I,
Jeff, you're not going. Yep.
I
I
know.
will be
Oh,
there.
we will miss you, but see you, Christy.
I will
Yes,
miss
I
you
will be
right there.
there.
All right.
Well,
Bye, y'all.
thank you so much, Dawn, for joining Christy and I. I think we had a great conversation. We definitely want to have you back on at a later date to see how things went with this transition, what you're going to do next, so forth and so on. I thought the conversation was very, very interesting. So thanks again. Next on our show, we will have Mia Mizell joining us on our next show. And with that said, I am the Bodacious Cowboy. Thanks for joining the Storytelling Chronicles, empowering women into logistics. Hope everybody has a great week. Take care now.
Bye.
See ya.